Arab slave trade was a devastating practice that existed in various parts of the Middle East, North Africa, and East Africa for centuries. It was a system of slavery that involved the capture, transportation, and enslavement of millions of African men, women, and children. It began in the 7th century when Arab Muslims conquered North Africa and started to take prisoners of war as slaves. Over time, the demand for slaves increased, and traders began to venture deeper into Africa to capture more slaves. Slaves were obtained through various means, including raids on villages, kidnapping, and trading with other African tribes. The conditions of the slave trade were brutal. Slaves were forced to march hundreds of miles to the coast, often in chains and under harsh conditions. Many died during the journey from disease, starvation, and exhaustion. Those who survived were sold to Arab traders, who transported them across the Sahara Desert to various destinations, including the Middle East and India. Once sold into slavery, African slaves had no rights and were treated as property. They were forced to work long hours, often in dangerous and degrading conditions. Slaves were subject to physical abuse, including beatings, mutilations, and even castration. Female slaves were often subjected to sexual abuse, including rape, and were sometimes forced into prostitution. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Arab slave trade was the practice of castration. Many male slaves were castrated before being sold into slavery, a procedure which was often performed without anesthesia and led to high mortality rates. Castration was intended to create a class of eunuchs, who were seen as more docile and trustworthy than other slaves. Arabs used to enslave not only Africans, but people of other ethnicities as well, including white people who were considered superior to black people. In the 18th century, the African continent was dominated by Arab barbarians in the north, and Islam moved south along the Nile and desert roads, beginning at least 10 centuries of slavery for the benefit of Islamic countries. The Arab slave trade had a devastating impact on African societies, as many communities were raided and depopulated. It led to the breakup of families, the loss of cultural heritage, and the disruption of traditional economic and social structures. Many African states and societies became dependent on the slave trade for their economic survival, which perpetuated the cycle of violence and exploitation. It began to decline in the 19th century due to several factors. One of the primary reasons was the growing influence of European powers in Africa and the Middle East. European countries began to establish colonies and exert control over the regions where the slave trade was taking place. Furthermore, the international slave trade was abolished in the 19th century, and many countries began to take steps to end slavery within their own borders. This had an impact on the Arab slave trade as well, as it became more difficult to acquire slaves through legal means.
The Arab slave trade, the Islamization of the continent of Africa. Okay, now as we delve into this topic, I want us to bear in mind, or have it in mind, that before Islam, before Christianity, before any other form of religion, external form of religion coming into the motherland, we were Africans. What I'm saying is, before any religion, we were Africans first. We were brothers and sisters first. Like, we are Africans first. We are brothers and sisters first, before any religion coming in. Okay, before any external influence, we are one people. This is what I want us to have in mind while we discuss this topic, so that we know that at the end of it all, because it came, it's an external something, it came. When it is time for it to go, it will go. But what will remain is that bond that we have as one people. as the melanated brothers and sisters, the African people, your majesties, this is what will remain. And so whatever we do to ourselves in the name of I am a Christian, I am a Muslim, we should have this in mind always. It wasn't part of us, and it's going to go the way it came. And when it goes, how will you now look at your brother's face when you have treated your brother or your sister in a way that you treated them when you claim you were part of one religion or the other religion? So, when you talk about the Arab slave trade, is another part of the emotional side of the continent, the emotional side of the melanated people, because what was done to the melanated people was worse, or is worse. Okay, now we talk more about the transatlantic slave trade and others around the European angle, because it is recent more than the Arab slave trade. Okay, and one thing with the Arab slave trade is that we think that since it's that long, it has ended, but we are still experiencing it up until this point that you're listening to me. We are still experiencing Arab slave trade in the continent of Africa through agencies sometimes that are operating with the knowledge of the government, agencies that claim they provide job opportunities for Africans who want to go to the Middle East for job opportunities. These Africans go through this means, through these agencies, and it's like you are leaving your comfort zone into another form of slave trade, like into slave trade itself. We hear of how Black people are treated in the Arab nations. We hear of how whenever they make mistakes, they are not treated like humans in the Arab nations. This is still the continuation of the Arab slave trade. So I would want us to listen to this. You know, when I keep saying it, that what the Arab did to the motherland is a wound that can never be healed. Forget that people are not talking about it now as it should be, but it's a wound that cannot be healed. Like what these people did was castrating the men, just like wiping out the light. And that's why you see the northern part of the continent of Africa have become, you know, you look at them, in short, they tell you that they are not Africans. They tell you they are Arabs. They come out to public media, say these things, and the mainstream media will not have anything to do. They don't do anything because, of course, this is the notion they are pushing out to people, that the northern part of the continent is not Africa. But that was a lie, or that is a lie, okay? These were people that were affected mostly by the Arab slave trade. In short, the effect of this, of what they did to the motherland, is still evident in the northern part of the continent. Look at how they look. See how they look. They are more of Arabs now than Africans. Why? It is because of colonization. The Arab colonization of the continent of Africa. We started long ago before the European colonization of the motherland.
The 25th of March was, as usual, commemorated as the day Britain officially abolished its slave trade in 1807. But how many recall that Arab slavers were the first and last in modern times to ship millions of Africans out of the continent as slaves? The Arab history of anti-black racism predates European anti-black racism by several centuries. The early Islamic Empire exhibited all the characteristics of anti-black racism, and blacks suffered the lowest form of bondage. Europeans took photographs of chained black African slaves in Arab slave trading vessels on the east coast of Africa in the 1880s. Slavery persisted openly in Saudi Arabia and other Muslim countries in the latter half of the 20th century, 100 years after slavery was abolished in the United States. As late as the 1960s, African Muslims still sold slaves when they arrived on pilgrimages, as a way to finance their pilgrimages. Arab nations lagged far behind the rest of the world in abolishing slavery. Saudi Arabia and Yemen in 1962, United Arab Emirates in 1963, Oman in 1970. However, unlike the rest of the Arab nations, hereditary racial slavery persists in Mauritania, despite multiple official attempts to abolish it. In 1981, by presidential decree, Mauritania became the last country in the world to abolish slavery, but no criminal laws were passed to enforce the ban. Under international pressure in 2007, the Mauritanian government passed a law allowing slaveholders to be persecuted. However, that law has rarely been enforced. Far more anti-slavery human rights activists have been prosecuted than the handful of Mauritanian white masters. In addition, slavers are offered compensation for freeing the enslaved, while the victims of the brutality are offered nothing. In 2015, under international and some domestic mobilization pressure, The Mauritanian government created 3 special courts to prosecute slavery, but so far they have only tried very few cases. However, that's just not all about this oddly unique sect of slavers. The Arab slavers at some point in history, driven outrageously by their odd ambition for economic power and human control.
That's just not all about this oddly unique sect of slavers. The Arab slavers at some point in history, driven outrageously by their odd ambition for economic power and human control, had their African male captives subjected to unimaginable suffering and exploitation. Castration. Yes, you heard correctly. Now it is of utmost importance to note that what you are about to hear might seem like comparing which